Most people give away their power without realizing it. They reveal every plan, every emotion, every frustration, every next move, then wonder why they're misunderstood, manipulated, or constantly facing resistance. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to control. That's why truly powerful people move differently. They don't feel the need to explain everything. They don't announce every goal. They don't expose their inner world to everyone around them. Stoicism teaches that silence is not weakness, it's protection. Because when people can't read your mind, they can't easily influence it. When they can't predict your next move, they can't prepare against it. And when you learn to keep your thoughts disciplined, your emotions controlled, and your intentions private, you develop a quiet strength that commands respect without ever demanding attention. You've been in that room before, the one where you said too much, where you laid out exactly what you were feeling, exactly what you were planning, exactly where you were hurting, and the person sitting across from you used every single word against you. Not always immediately, sometimes weeks later, sometimes in the softest voice with the most innocent face, but they used it because you handed it to them. You thought vulnerability was connection. What you didn't realize was, not everyone who sits close to you deserves to sit inside you. Most people don't betray you out of evil. They betray you out of human nature. When someone knows your fears, they unconsciously use them as leverage. When someone knows your insecurities, they unconsciously frame conversations around them. When someone knows exactly what breaks you, they may never intend to break you, but the moment things get difficult between you, that knowledge becomes a weapon. This is not cynicism. This is psychology. This is how power quietly transfers from one person to another, through oversharing, over-explaining, and emotional exposure at the wrong time with the wrong people. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." And self-respect doesn't start with how you carry yourself in public. It starts with what you protect in private. It starts with understanding that your inner world, your goals, your wounds, your next moves, is sacred ground. Not everyone gets a visa to enter that space. There's a version of you that stops performing for people who were never in your audience to begin with. A version of you that moves through life without narrating every chapter to people who are secretly waiting for you to fail. A version of you so grounded, so deliberate, so composed, that when you walk into a room, people feel your presence before you even speak. That's not arrogance. That's what happens when a person finally stops leaking their power through every conversation. This is what it means to never let them read your mind. Type this in the comments. My mind, my kingdom. Now let's begin. Point 1. You were never difficult to understand. You were just easy to use. There's something painful that nobody names directly. It's the moment you realize that the people who claimed they could never understand you actually understood you perfectly. They knew exactly what made you feel small. They knew exactly which silence from them would send you spiraling. They knew precisely when to pull back just enough to make you reach forward. That wasn't confusion on their part. That was strategy. And it worked because somewhere along the way, you gave them the full blueprint of who you are. Your triggers, your fears, your need for approval, wrapped in the language of honesty and trust. Epictetus, who was born a slave and rose to become one of the most powerful philosophical minds in history, said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." What he understood from living in chains was something most free people never grasp, that your internal world is the only property that can never be confiscated. The moment you start broadcasting it to everyone, you are voluntarily handing over the one thing no one can forcibly take from you. When you over-explain, you're not being transparent, you're being reactive. You're responding to someone's silent doubt with a flood of words that only confirms you needed their validation to feel stable. And people, whether consciously or not, register that. They file it away. They learn that your confidence has conditions, that your peace has a price. And slowly, without you even noticing, they start setting that price for you. The most composed people you've ever encountered in your life weren't cold. They weren't hiding. They had simply made a decision that their inner world was not a public space. They responded without revealing. They listened without leaking. They engaged fully. But they never let you see the full architecture of what was happening inside them. And that quality made them magnetic. Not because mystery is a game, but because self-containment is the purest form of self-respect. You were never hard to understand. You were just generous with your interiority in spaces that didn't deserve that generosity. That changes now. Point 2. The person who needs no approval lives in a world others can't touch. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that nobody talks about openly. It's not physical. It doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It comes from spending years, sometimes decades, quietly measuring your worth through other people's reactions. Watching their faces when you speak. Listening for the tone behind their words. Refreshing your sense of self every single morning based on whether the people around you seemed pleased with who you were the day before. That exhaustion is real. And it's the most invisible prison a human being can build around themselves. The tragedy is that most people trapped in this pattern are deeply intelligent, deeply feeling individuals. They're not weak. They're actually extraordinarily perceptive. They just turned that perception inward in the worst possible direction. Instead of reading the room to protect themselves, they started reading the room to perform for it. And every performance requires an audience. Once you need an audience, you've already surrendered the one thing Stoicism guards above everything else: your interior freedom. Seneca wrote in his letters, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what is not worth fearing." And one of the greatest things not worth fearing is the withdrawal of approval from people who were only ever comfortable with the version of you that was easy to manage. When you shrink yourself for someone's comfort, you are not being humble. You are financing their sense of control with your own self-erasure. And that debt compounds silently until one day you look in the mirror and genuinely struggle to recognize what remains. Approval seeking doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as kindness, as consideration, as being a good person. But there is a difference between choosing kindness from a place of fullness and performing kindness from a place of fear. One expands you. The other slowly hollows you out until your entire personality becomes a series of calculated responses designed to keep other people comfortable at the cost of your own truth. The person who has genuinely released the need for approval doesn't become cold or indifferent. They become something far more powerful. They become consistent, the same in private as in public, the same when praised as when criticized, unreachable through flattery, unshakable through rejection. That consistency is not a personality trait. It is a daily discipline. And it begins the moment you stop letting other people's perception of you determine the temperature of your own self-worth. Point 3. Silence is not emptiness. It's the language of those who've already won. Somewhere along the way, silence got rebranded as coldness, as disconnection, as something that needed to be fixed or filled or explained. So people started talking. Not because they had something essential to say, but because silence made them feel exposed, because the quiet felt like an accusation, because somewhere deep in their nervous system lived this belief that if they weren't actively narrating their existence, they might simply disappear from the minds of the people they needed to matter to. And so they filled every gap, every pause, every awkward moment, with words that cost them more than they ever realized. But watch the people who have genuinely mastered themselves. Watch how they sit with silence, like it's a comfortable room they've lived in for years. Watch how they let a question hang in the air without rushing to answer it. Watch how they absorb criticism without immediately defending, deflecting, or dissolving. There is something in that stillness that unsettles people who haven't found it yet, because it reads as power, and it is power. Not the loud, performative kind, the deep-rooted, immovable kind. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoic philosophy, reportedly said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we say." But the deeper teaching beneath that simplicity is this: the person who speaks less reveals less. The person who reveals less maintains more control over how they are perceived, how they are approached, and ultimately, how they are treated. Silence is not the absence of a response. It is frequently the most precise and powerful response available. There are conversations you should have never had, rooms you should have never explained yourself in, people who asked questions not because they wanted to understand you, but because your answer would tell them exactly how to position themselves against you. And you answered. Fully, generously, honestly. And they took that honesty and folded it into strategy. Silence, used with intention, communicates something words can never fully achieve. It says, "I have considered this fully, and I have chosen not to give you access." It says, "My reaction is mine, and I decide when and whether it becomes yours to witness." That is not arrogance. That is the quiet, devastating dignity of a person who has finally learned where their borders are and decided to enforce them. Point 4. Stop announcing your next move. Let your results speak in a voice they can't interrupt. There is a particular kind of person who announces everything, every new goal, every new beginning, every decision to change. They post about it. They tell their closest people. They gather the energy of other people's excitement around their intention like it's fuel. And then, quietly, almost invisibly, that announcement becomes the substitute for the action itself. The dopamine that should have come from the result arrives early, attached to the announcement, and somewhere between the declaration and the execution, the momentum dies. Not from laziness, from premature exposure. Psychology has a name for this. When you tell someone your goal and they respond positively, your brain registers a version of the satisfaction that should only come from achieving it. The identity is felt before the work is done, and the drive, that raw, hungry, uncomfortable drive that makes people actually change their lives, quietly dissolves in the warmth of premature recognition. Marcus Aurelius never once announced his intentions to Rome. He wrote them in private journals that weren't discovered until after his death. He governed an empire not through declarations of future greatness, but through the relentless private execution of daily discipline. He understood something that most people are still learning. Confine yourself to the present, not the announced future, not the celebrated intention. The present action, taken quietly, with no audience required. Your next move is not a story for other people. It is a promise you make to yourself in private and honor through behavior. The most dangerous version of you is not the loudest one in the room. It is the one that went completely silent for a period of time, and then simply appeared, transformed, with results that required no explanation and invited no debate. Let them wonder, let them watch. Let results be the only announcement you ever needed to make. Point 5. Protect your peace, like it's the only thing standing between you and everything you're becoming. Nobody warns you about the specific kind of person who will sense your growth before you've even fully stepped into it and instinctively move to disrupt it. Not always out of conscious malice, sometimes out of their own unresolved fear. Sometimes because your evolution quietly exposes their stagnation. Sometimes because the version of you that was struggling, doubting, and seeking validation was easier to exist beside than the version of you that is becoming unreachable. And when people feel they're losing access to a version of you they were comfortable managing, they pull, they provoke, they create urgency around issues that don't require urgency. They introduce noise precisely when you found a frequency of quiet that was finally beginning to serve you. This is not coincidence. This is human nature operating exactly as it always has. Epictetus taught that external events carry no inherent power over the prepared mind. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. Which means the disruption was never really about the argument, the comment, the situation, or the person. It was about whether your peace had deep enough roots to survive contact with turbulence without being uprooted entirely. Peace is not a passive state. It is an active, daily, sometimes brutal choice. It means removing yourself from conversations that exist only to drain you. It means recognizing when someone is performing concern while actually harvesting information. It means understanding that not every question deserves an answer, not every provocation deserves a reaction, and not every person who demands your emotional energy has earned the right to it. The moment you start genuinely protecting your peace, people will call it distance. They will call it ego. They will say you've changed. And they will not mean it as a compliment. Let them. Because the truth is that you have changed. You stopped allowing your nervous system to be a public space. You stopped mistaking constant availability for genuine connection. You started treating your mental and emotional energy as the finite, irreplaceable resource it actually is, and allocating it with the same intentionality you would give to anything else in your life that truly matters. You are in the middle of becoming something that requires protection, something that requires silence, discipline, and the courage to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Guard that process. Guard it fiercely, because the world will always have opinions about who you should be, but only you know what you are actually building. The most powerful version of you has always been the quietest one. Everything discussed in this video comes down to one truth that Stoicism has carried through centuries without ever softening it. The greatest power a human being can develop is the power over their own inner world, not power over other people, not power over outcomes, power over the one thing that was always entirely yours: your mind, your responses, your silence, your direction. Most people will spend their entire lives waiting for the world to finally understand them, waiting for the right person to see their worth, waiting for the right moment to start protecting themselves. And while they wait, they keep giving access, keep explaining, keep performing, keep handing the map of their interior life to people who were never truly trying to find their way to them, only through them. You don't have to live that way anymore. The version of you that stops explaining yourself to people who have already made up their mind, that person becomes unshakable. The version of you that moves in silence, builds in private, and reveals through results rather than announcements, that person becomes unstoppable. The version of you that protects peace, not as a luxury, but as a fundamental act of self-preservation, that person becomes the most dangerous, most magnetic, most genuinely free individual in any room they walk into. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That retreat is available to you right now, not after the situation resolves, not after the relationship heals, not after the circumstances change. Right now, in the decision to go inward, to move deliberately, and to stop letting people read the one thing that was never theirs to hold. Your mind is not a book left open on a table for anyone to pick up. It is a kingdom. Rule it accordingly. Type this in the comments: born to win.